Today we are going to read a story called The Youngest Marcher. Now, looking at this book, what are some takeaways that you see just from the illustrations on the cover?
There are there's a child marching and his parents holding signs.
Okay, we do see some signs there. What flag is she holding?
The American flag.
Okay, so it seems like just from the title, what do you gather?
That she's going to march.
And she's probably the youngest one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's read a little bit about what this is about. Whenever Mike flew into town, Audrey and her mama cooked barbecue ribs, stewed greens, sweet potato souffle, and Audrey's favorite hot rolls baptized in butter. Other folks knew him as Mike as Martin or Dr. King. The Hendrickses used his nickname. They did the same with the other ministers too, like Fred Shuttlesworth and Jim Bevel. After Mike blessed the feast, Mama expected Audrey to keep still during supper, but when grown-ups talked about wiping out the segregation laws that kept black and white people apart in Birmingham, she just had to speak up. Audrey intended to go places and to do things like anybody else. I want to eat my ice cream inside Newberry's. I want to sit downstairs at the Alabama. I don't want hand-me-down school books, but stools at the counter, plush movie theater seats, books so fresh they'd crackle when you open them. Those were for white children. Hush, hissed Mama. 9-year-old children should not speak in front of company, especially ministers like Mike, Fred, and Jim, who were bringing dreams of justice. So what is a big word here? Starts with an S.
Segregation.
Segregation. What is segregation?
For them to be separated.
It's for them to be separated. Good job. So we are going to talk about civil rights. Giving everybody equal rights. Audrey knew all about segregation. She knew to pay the driver at the front of the bus and then step off and walk around the back door. Drink from the fountain with dirty bowl and warm water. Use the freight elevator at the department stores downtown. Front row seats, cool water, elevators with white-gloved operators. Laws said those were for the white folks. Every Monday night, Audrey and her mama and daddy and her aunts, uncles, and cousins joined neighbors and friends at Fred's church for worship, fellowship, and testimony. She sang and swayed along with the movement choir, her voice spirited and spiritual, black and white together. We shall overcome, for once she didn't have to keep still. Then came testimonies. White store owners won't hire me. Ku Klux Klanners chased me. Policemen called me names. The hateful stories made Audrey squirm, and she tried to tell her mama, that's not right. Shh. How could Mama expect her to hush? She could make things right, but what could she do? When Mike visited Fred's church, thousands of people crowded around to hear him preach. In a voice as taut as steel cables, as smooth as glass, he intoned, segregation is morally wrong and sinful. That's true, fired up Audrey, sat taller. An unjust law is no law at all, he proclaimed. Audrey had listened to Mike explain his plan at her supper table and knew what it meant. If a law is unjust, disobey it. Sit down inside Newberry's, picket those white stores, march to those protesters and those unfair laws. Why, even marching was against the law. Then get arrested. Who do you think Mike is? What important figure? Yes. Martin Luther King. And do you think that God wanted segregation? Or do you think that it is sinful?
It is sinful.
Yes. So that's what he's saying. Fill the jails, Mike exclaimed. Fill Birmingham's jails so full that the policemen can't squeeze in one more person. Pack cells so tight that police will have to quit arresting people for demanding their rights. Audrey just knew Mike's plan would work. She twisted in her pew and to see which grown-ups would walk down the aisle, volunteer for jails, but they mostly stayed put, eyes staring at the feet, hands on their knees. Feet, hands, and knees didn't move. Fill the jails, Mike pleaded, meeting after meeting, but heads shook all around Audrey. No, best not break those segregation laws. Boss man will fire me. Landlord will evict me. Policemen will beat me. But if nobody protested, Mike's plan would fail. Police could keep arresting anyone, anytime, for anything, forever. Audrey would never be able to go places or do things like everybody else. One night, Jim announced a new idea. If grown-ups won't do it, fill the jails with children. Audrey leaped to her feet. I want to go to jail, she exclaimed. I want to go to jail. Mama looked deep and saw that Audrey's eyes begged, please. Okay, Mama said. Audrey strutted down that aisle. She was going to jail. 2 mornings later, she put on a fresh pressed dress and Mary Jane's and turned down socks. Protesters gotta look nice. In the meantime, her daddy bought her a new game to help her pass the time in jail. Her mama and daddy took her to Center Street Elementary to tell her teacher she'd be absent, maybe for a whole week. Miss Wills wrapped her arms around her. Audrey knew she was proud of her. She said goodbye to her grandparents. You'll be fine. Her grandmother said she knew Audrey would be brave. So did Audrey. Then her mama and daddy drove to 16th Street Baptist Church where children were gathering. Even before she reached the door, Audrey heard a loud voice chanting freedom songs. How old was Audrey? Do you remember?
9.
She was 9 years old. What do you think you would do? Would you do it?
Yes.
You think you would? Yeah, it's brave. But that's the exact same age you are. So you have a lot in common with Audrey. Inside, hundreds of big kids called out to friends, crowded around signs for their high schools. Parker, Carver. Her head swiveled. Where was the sign for Center Elementary? She was the only protester from her school, the youngest child in the whole church, and she knew no one. Audrey huddled by her parents in the basement. What do you think she's feeling? Lonely? Scared?
Afraid.
But when Jim lined her up with the others, 2 by 2, and the door swung open, Audrey straightened up. She was going to break a law and go to jail to help make things right. Clutching a protest sign in one hand and the game in the other, Audrey marched out the door. She stomped and sang, ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Turn me round, turn me round. So let's look at some of these. Can you read one of these signs?
Can a man love God and hate his brother?
Good. Segregation is a sin.
Justice for all.
Justice for all. Half a block from the church, a white policeman stopped Audrey and pointed towards a police van. Sentence, 1 week in juvenile hall.
That doesn't seem that bad. Just a week.
A matron locked Audrey in the day room with 24 other girls, all older, all bigger, all strangers. Audrey sat down alone and slipped the cover off her game. I told you to sit down, the matron yelled. Audrey jumped. She didn't remember standing up. The matron dragged her to a dark, empty room. When I tell you to do something, you do it, she commanded, or I'll leave you here. Trembling, Audrey quietly followed the matron back to the day room, put away the game, lay her head down and cried. Jail was harder than she'd thought, and she wasn't fine at all. By evening, Audrey was hungry and tired. For dinner, soupy, oily, tasteless grits. At night, a bare mattress with one thin sheet for a cover. Audrey and her cellmates were let outdoor into an empty concrete pen surrounded by high prison walls. The older girls talked together. Audrey wondered what her classmates were doing. Miss Wills would be keeping them busy. She feels pretty lonely. On another day, Audrey was sent to a huge room and told to sit in a chair, that it was so high her feet dangled above the floor. 4 white men glared at her. She'd never talked to a white man before. Are you against America? One demanded to know. No, sir, she answered politely. What do you talk about at those meetings? Another asked. Our freedom. Why did you march? To go places and to do things like anybody else. What's wrong with that? Every mealtime, Audrey stared at the greasy grits. She could barely spoon them into her mouth, let alone swallow them. Every night, the cot's wire springs jabbed. Every morning, she had nothing to do but sit alone with her game. In the afternoons, though, more kids crowded in the day room. Some days, many of them arrived sopping wet. A girl explained that firemen aimed powerful hoses at the children, surging water, and spun them off their feet. By Audrey's 5th day in detention, the police couldn't squeeze one more person. We filled up all the rooms. Audrey practically jumped up and down, and she was so proud. Watching television in the day room, she saw black people stroll straight into the stores and restaurants like they belonged there. No one else could be sent to jail. Everything has changed. After 7 days, Audrey went home. Her mommy and daddy wrapped their arms tight around her, washed the jail off of her, and for dinner, hot rolls baptized in butter. So, what do you think the theme of this story is?
The story is you should treat everybody the same.
Yes, treat everybody with respect. That's how the Bible would want. And that's what this story is about. Are you too young to change something?
No.
Because Audrey, this was a real girl, and she really marched, and she really made a difference in the civil rights movement. All right, good job.